In a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of a bustling city lived a young girl named Emily Parker. Emily had never known the comfort of a two-parent home, for her father, David, had tragically passed away when she was still an infant. Sarah Parker, her mother, had been the sole carer, raising Emily through a mixture of hard work and sacrifice. Life wasn't easy for them. Sarah worked as a cleaner, a nanny, and a factory worker, doing everything she could to ensure Emily had the opportunity to go to school. They lived in a small, cramped apartment, the walls often thin and the floors creaky, but their love for each other made their little world feel whole. Sarah made a game of turning their hardships into lessons. One night, as they sat at the kitchen table, the only light coming from a flickering candle, Sarah gently placed a small bowl of soup in front of Emily. It was simple but nourishing. "You know, darling," she began, her voice soft yet strong, "sometimes the world will feel heavy, but you must always carry it with grace." Emily smiled weakly, her hand reaching for the soup, savoring the warmth that spread through her. "I know, Mom. I'll make you proud." The words felt like a promise to both of them. Despite their financial hardships, Sarah always found a way to make Emily feel special. "You are the brightest star in our little world, Emily," she often told her daughter as they sat down for a simple meal of rice and beans. "Education is your ticket out of this life. Don't ever forget that." Emily clung to these words as if they were a lifeline. They were her motivation to study late into the night by the flickering light of a small desk lamp. Every time she felt the sting of fatigue or hunger, she remembered her mother's sacrifices. Emily's resilience and determination led her to the top of her class year after year, winning scholarships and accolades. Her dream was to one day become a teacher to inspire other children the way her mother had inspired her. As she prepared for her final exams before graduation, Emily sat in her room, books scattered around her. Her mother knocked softly on the door, entering with a tired smile. "Are you still studying, sweetheart? You've been at it for hours." Emily looked up, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, but she smiled brightly. "I'm almost there, Mom. Just a few more pages." "I won't stop until I get that scholarship." Sarah walked over and kissed her forehead. "I know you'll make it, Emily. You always do." Emily's heart skipped a beat as she read the email. Westwood Academy, one of the most prestigious schools in the city, was offering her an interview. She barely believed it at first, then read it again and again, just to be sure. The email detailed the time and date of her interview, and she was to meet with a panel of highly respected individuals from the school. Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone to tell her mother. "Mom, you won't believe it. I got an interview at Westwood Academy," she exclaimed, her voice shaking with excitement. Sarah, who had been cleaning the living room, stopped in her tracks. She put down the broom and looked at her daughter, eyes wide with pride and joy. "Emily, I knew this day would come. You've worked so hard for this. Go show them who you are." That night, Emily stayed up late preparing. She ironed her only suit-worn but neat and rehearsed her answers in front of the mirror. She wasn't just preparing for an interview. She was preparing for a chance to change her life and her mother's life forever. The next morning, she arrived at Westwood Academy early. The school was grand, its brick walls towering over the neatly manicured lawns, large windows reflecting the bright morning sun. Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as she entered the building, the halls lined with portraits of past scholars and dignitaries. It felt like entering a different world altogether. As she walked through the long corridor, her footsteps echoed in the space. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Parker." Turning, she saw a well-dressed woman, her warm smile offering reassurance. "You must be Emily. I'm Mrs. Rosie, the head of the board. Please follow me." When she entered the conference room for the interview, Emily felt a rush of nerves. At the head of the table sat the principal, Mr. William, a man in his mid-40s who seemed to exude an air of confidence and power. His dark hair was neatly combed, his blue eyes sharp and assessing. He stood when she entered, extending a hand. "Miss Parker, welcome. We're very glad to have you here today." Emily shook his hand, her fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you for having me, Mr. William." The panel of 4 men watched her closely as she introduced herself and began to answer their questions. Emily talked passionately about her education, her desire to make a difference in the lives of children, and her vision for fostering creativity and learning in her classroom. The panel was impressed with her poise and intelligence, and Mr. Williams seemed especially interested. After what felt like an eternity, the interview ended. As Emily stood to leave, Mr. Williams smiled and said, "We'll be in touch soon, Miss Parker. Thank you for your time." Walking out of the building, Emily felt both elated and exhausted. She had given her best, and she was proud of what she had done. Now, all she could do was wait. The call came 2 days later. The voice on the other end was warm and pleasant, yet formal. "Miss Parker, we are pleased to offer you the teaching position at Westwood Academy. Please come in tomorrow to sign the contract." Emily felt as though she were floating. Her heart raced as she called her mother to share the incredible news. Sarah's eyes filled with tears of pride as she embraced Emily. "I always knew you could do it, Emily. This is just the beginning." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of excitement. Emily settled into her new job at the prestigious school, and everything seemed to be going perfectly. She had her own classroom, bright and welcoming, and her students adored her. For the first time in her life, Emily felt like she truly belonged. She and Sarah could finally afford things they had only dreamed of: a decent meal every day, clothes that didn't have patches, and even a trip to the park on weekends. But soon, things began to take a dark turn. It started subtly. Mr. William, the principal, began calling Emily into his office more frequently. At first, he asked her about her progress, her teaching methods, and her personal life. His compliments were kind, but felt strangely possessive. "You're doing so well, Emily. He would say with a smile that made her feel both proud and uneasy, "You really stand out." As the weeks passed, Emily started feeling more uncomfortable with these one-on-one meetings. Mr. William would linger till long after their conversations ended, his hand brushing against hers in a way that made her skin crawl. She told herself it was nothing, just part of the job. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. Then came the first time he crossed the line. One evening, after the last bell had rung, Mr. William invited Emily into his office for a casual coffee. The request seemed harmless enough at first. They sat across from each other as he poured her a cup, and they discussed the day's events. But soon his questions shifted. "You know, Emily," he said, leaning forward, "you're really something special. You've got beauty, brains, and ambition. Not every woman has all three." Emily forced a smile, trying to remain professional. "Thank you, Mr. William, but I'm just focused on doing my job well." But as he spoke, he moved closer, his breath warm against her cheek. "I think we could make a great team, Emily," he said softly. Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This was no longer professional. It was something else, something threatening. She stood up quickly, knocking over her coffee cup. "I think I should leave now," she said, her voice shaky. Mr. William didn't stop her. He merely smiled and nodded. "Of course, Miss Parker. You're a hard worker. I appreciate it." But Emily could see the glint of something more in his eyes, something that sent a cold chill through her. Over the following weeks, Mr. Williams' behavior grew more overt. He would call Emily into his office at odd hours, even late at night, claiming to discuss work, but then making personal comments about her appearance or her life. She could feel his eyes linger on her longer than was appropriate. He began making unwanted physical contact, brushing his hand against her arm or, once, placing a hand on her waist under the guise of guiding her out of the room. One afternoon, after an especially unsettling encounter, Emily broke down in her car. She felt trapped. She had worked so hard for this job, and it was everything she had dreamed of. But at what cost? She couldn't continue this way. The toll it was taking on her mental health was unbearable. The final straw came one evening when Mr. William attempted to kiss her. "I know how hard you've worked," he whispered, as his hand reached for her face. "I think you deserve more than just a promotion." Emily recoiled, horrified. "No," she said firmly, backing away. "This is not right. I don't want this." Mr. Williams' expression faltered, his smile slipping into something cold and dark. "You'll regret this," he muttered as she quickly left his office. That night, Emily cried herself to sleep, the weight of the decision heavy on her heart. She couldn't stay at Westwood Academy any longer. She loved the school, but she loved herself more. The next morning, she submitted her resignation letter and walked away from the job she had fought so hard to get. Emily's decision to resign was not made lightly, but it was the only choice she had. She knew she couldn't let Mr. Williams' actions go unchallenged. She recorded a video on her phone detailing everything that had happened, the inappropriate comments, the advances, the way Mr. William had abused his position of power. She uploaded the video to social media, hoping to find justice. It quickly went viral, with people across the city expressing support for Emily's bravery. But Mr. William, ever the powerful figure, denied the allegations and went public with his version of the story. "This girl is lying," he said in a news interview, his voice dripping with disdain. "She asked me for a loan of 1 lakh rupees. When I refused, she made these ridiculous accusations to ruin my reputation." The media took his side, largely because of his wealth and status in the city. People began to turn on Emily, accusing her of fabricating the story for financial gain. The pain of being disbelieved was unbearable. She sat in her small apartment, crying for hours, wondering how the world could be so cruel. But then, just when Emily thought she had lost everything, 3 teachers from Westwood Academy came forward. They had kept silent for many years, fearing the same fate, but now, inspired by Emily's courage, they spoke the truth. "I've been through the same thing," one teacher said in an emotional interview. "Mr. Harris has done this to me, too. We're not alone." The 3 teachers' testimonies caused a wave of outrage. People who had once supported Mr. William now turned against him. The police took immediate action, and soon after, Mr. William was arrested. The case went to trial, and he was convicted for his crimes. In the aftermath, the Westwood Academy administration issued an apology to Emily and the 3 other teachers. They offered them their positions back, with full support and respect. Emily, though hesitant at first, decided to return to the school. She was no longer the girl afraid to speak up. She was the woman who had fought for justice. She walked back into the school, not as a victim, but as a survivor, a symbol of courage to those who had suffered in silence. Emily knew that her voice had made a difference, and she would continue to use it to inspire change. Her mother, who had supported her through every moment of doubt, stood by her side. Together, they had conquered the greatest battle of their lives. And as Emily stood in front of her new students, ready to teach them the lessons she had learnt not just from books, but from life, she realized that her journey was only just beginning.